Well, we are talking with a good friend of mine, Eric Ramos. Appreciate you being here, Eric. You know, Eric has a story to tell, and we're going to talk, and we're going to hear some of his story, his background. And you know, as former witnesses, as ex-witnesses, as fading witnesses, we need to kind of clean out that stuff. You know, get that Watchtower junk out of our mind. I know you probably know what I'm talking about. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a conversation together and just hear what Eric has to say and kind of get some tips from him on how he kind of deprogrammed himself and got out of the Watchtower mindset. Again, Eric, thanks for coming and talking with us. Maybe you could just tell us your background and how you got into the witnesses and where you are at today.
Well, I was raised in the truth like many of us were. I was baptized when I was 14. I didn't realize I was baptized that young until I actually thought about it and did the research as far as thinking back in your timeline. And I enjoyed the ministry quite a bit. So it was easy for me to put in lots of times in the ministry. And before I knew it, I was serving at the headquarters. I did that for 5 years.
And that was at Brooklyn, Bethel?
Brooklyn.
Wow.
And I was in the press room. So those were very exciting times in my life because you're young and you're in the city and you're with a whole bunch of people your age. So
and you were making Bibles, making books?
We printed everything. We printed Bibles, books, tracts. We printed some of the Smuggler's edition of the Watchtowers. And
oh, that they would actually smuggle in foreign countries?
Yeah, so we printed the condensed version of some of the Watchtower publications that could be smuggled into, like, it could be hidden in a tie or, you know, hidden in really small objects. And when I left Bethel, like you, pioneered, and I was a ministerial servant, and I was giving public talks, and I was one of the outgoing speakers that went to other congregations and gave talks outside the local congregation.
So they were grooming you to be an elder anyways then?
Yeah, definitely so.
All right, so I appreciate that background. That kind of helps us to get where you're coming from. Your dad was a long-time elder too, of course.
Yes, my dad was the what used to be called the presiding overseer, so he was an elder for a long time.
Yeah, now the coordinator of the body of elders, right?
The way I got out is because I was excommunicated through a failed marriage, and they had to blame somebody for the failed marriage. So the elders decided that I should be disfellowshipped. So I was out, and it was a very difficult period because my belief system condemned me as an awful person. And it was very difficult to go through those periods because, you know, we're taught that worldly people are evil, but now I'm more evil than evil. So, surprisingly enough, the people that the witnesses call worldly are very supportive. They're very understanding. And, you know, any normal conversation or act of kindness was now from worldly people. So I went through a period where I had to be deprogrammed on how I thought. So I had to redo my whole belief system about what's good and what's bad, and, you know, my concepts of God had to be changed. But even though you think you're out, there's parts of you in your mind and your heart that you still think like a witness. So that happened during your judicial hearing. I went to the parking lot, and I was just out there to wait for you to come out and be supportive. But while I was waiting in the parking lot of Jehovah's Witness Kingdom Hall, families would come in and out, and boy, I felt scared. And when an elder came out, I was very afraid. And I'm thinking to myself, well, why should I be afraid? They have no authority over me.
And at this point, if I can ask, how long had you been out of the witnesses and disfellowshipped? How long had that
I had been out like 4 years.
At that point?
Yes.
Wow. And so 4 years has gone by, and you all of a sudden you're feeling these feelings of anxiety, seeing the elder, the authority figure, other witnesses that don't even know you because you're from a neighboring town anyways, so they don't even know that you were a former witness, but yet those feelings came up.
Yeah, the feelings of unworthiness, of being caught, even though I wasn't doing anything wrong, just being supportive of a friend. That helped me to realize that I am still have a lot of JW thinking. I am not living like a witness. I have nothing to do with witnesses anymore. Of course, my families have cut ties with me. That was difficult. But here I am in fear of this organization. And that's how ingrained the pattern of thinking is.
And you know, I'm really glad that you brought this up too, because there's people, I get a lot of messages through, through the YouTube channel and the email and my blog, and I have individuals that'll say, I've been out 20 years and they're still depressed, they're suicidal, or they're confused. They're asking me questions about like Bible questions, and I'm thinking to myself, you've had all this time, and I feel for them. I want to help these people the same way as you and anybody else would. But I'm thinking to myself, all this time has gone by, and they have not yet figured this stuff out. And the beauty of it is that you don't have to figure everything out. It just let yourself realize that it's okay, and then move forward. And so all this time can go by, and we realize there's still little Watchtower cobwebs in there.
People can live their entire natural lives in misery because of the teachings of the Watchtower. I mean, if you grow up going to meetings 3 days a week, field service, meetings before field service, your head is trained to think a certain way. That's who you are. This is how I feel about something. No, those feelings were given to you. Your opinion is molded. There is no individuality until you get out.
Yeah,
and
very
you start
little.
to think on your own.
Yeah, very little.
Like an example of how I began to think on my own is in talking to people who weren't witnesses, I noticed some contradictions in the belief system. Like, according to the old Mosaic law covenant, it was an eye for an eye, right?
Sure.
And death was a punishment.
Sure.
And then Christ comes and he gives the law of love. And you love your enemies. And you pray for those persecuting you. Well, wait a minute, that sounds like two different gods, two different sets of justice. So those are questions that came up in my own brain after years of being out. But of course, as long as you're a witness, you would never notice those contradictions.
Right.
Never.
Right. Interesting. Now, I want to go back just a little bit. One thing that also happens, a person leaves the Watchtower, they leave this high control group, and then all of a sudden, they kind of tend to sometimes go nuts a little bit. Now, when you first got out, for the first year or so, you told me you lived in a
Oh yeah, I partied quite a bit when
you
I got
lived in
out.
the bar is what you told me one time.
Yeah, I spent a year at the bar, easy, no problem. I
Yeah.
mean, the bar is a great place to have fun. A lot of your negative feelings can be numbed. And so yeah, I spent a year at the bar, easy. And that was the way that I was coping with these negative feelings, so that I didn't have to deal with them all at once, but I could deal with them a little at a time, you might say.
Right. Now, I remember you telling me one time that after you had been kicked out and all that, you were trying to keep up a relationship with your daughter, with her grandparents, with your folks, and maybe you were still mentally kind of thought the Watchtower and Jehovah's Witnesses were still the truth at that point, but then something, I remember you telling me something kind of happened that made you really start to think, why am I doing this?
Yeah, I was taking my daughter to visit my parents, and I felt the obligation to make sure that they have a relationship because I felt that I'm the one who took it from them.
Right.
But it got to be so one-sided that I gave up because I was having to travel about 2.5 to 3 hours one way, drop her off. Of course, I'm not allowed in the house, so I'd have to go somewhere else. And you can go see a movie, but that's only 2 hours. So if you have a whole day to fill, that's just a drop in the bucket.
Yeah.
And then I'd have to find a place to stay overnight or travel back, you know, another 2-3 hours. So it was one-sided, and it was taking away time that I would spend with my daughter, with my visitation. But the point that you're referring to is, I got a call when I was at work from my brother that my dad was in the hospital and he was going to have heart surgery and he could die. So I dropped everything. I left work. I didn't change clothes. I drove 3 hours to the hospital. And when I found the room my father was in, there was an elder sitting next to him. And they were talking. So out of respect for their belief system, I just stood in the doorway and I was waiting to be invited in. And I was never invited in, but there was a crowd of witnesses who were gathered behind me from the congregation, and they got tired of waiting for their turn, so they walked right past me. Nobody felt the need to respect me the way I was respecting them.
And these were ones that were from your former Kingdom Hall, or
these
they,
are people
they knew
that
who you were, some of these
I spent my whole life with.
Oh, okay.
I knew them for 40 years.
So there was no pat on the back or anything like that? Or,
there was no acknowledgement that I was there. They all walked past me. They squeezed themselves between me and the door jamb.
Right.
And all of a sudden it was one big happy reunion. And I realized
with
that
them and your dad.
with the witnesses and my dad, whereas
Right.
I'm excluded, still in the doorway.
Right.
And I realized that if I was going to talk to my dad, I'd have to wait till the witnesses were done, and when they're ready as a group, then I would be allowed in. And that was too much for me. So I just turned around and left. And I drove home very disheartened for the 3 hours back, realizing, why did I even rush over here? Why was I called? So no matter what people's religion are, family units should be respected.
Well, and on paper, the Watchtower in the literature says that family ties remain. That's actually on JW.org. There's a fact. Do Jehovah's Witnesses shun, and do they? And then it says right in their little web fact that, oh no, family ties remain, and they say that, but in practice, something else is the case.
Yes, and the witnesses act as a group. So if you are disfellowshipped, one and all will treat you the same. It doesn't matter if they've known you for a year or 10 years, or they're your brother, or they're your parent. They will act like the group.
Right. Okay, so after that, did you start to do like research on the internet, or did you just talk to friends? Like, I know you had a close friend that gave you some good advice, Mike and others, that those ones just helped you to kind of start sorting out your belief system and moving on?
Well, I started doing some research on the internet about the witnesses. And some of the things I read were still shocking to me. And even though I've read it with my own eyes, I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. So I was still loyal to the organization. Like when I learned on the internet that the Watchtower was part of the UN for almost a decade.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe it till I saw the documents with my own eyes.
Yeah.
When I learned that the Watchtower has investments in companies that are part of research and development for warfare and war equipment, I couldn't believe that until I saw it with my own eyes. In fact, it's kind of silly of me, but I saw it on my own computer at home, but I went to a public library and I checked it on their computer, and sure enough, I found the same information. But that was part of the belief system that this can't be true.
Yeah.
So I printed out the paperwork, and it's not necessary, but I just couldn't believe Watchtower would be part of a company that builds warfare equipment.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's called RANCAM. Their whole purpose is to research and development in warfare.
So I really appreciate you sharing this, because you're covering some things that are unpleasant to talk about, or that are, I should say, hard to talk about, but you want this brought out so that, I mean, you can clear the air for yourself, but also maybe help somebody else that's watching this video that's trying to figure out what should they do. Maybe they're still in. Maybe they've got all these friends and family members that are witnesses, and it's difficult.
Well, the reason I'm really doing this, I've got lots of reasons, but the biggest reason is it's a very traumatic experience to be kicked out of a high control group. And even though you're out for years, you could still be a JW in your head, the way you think, and you could be a JW in your heart. And you have to be deprogrammed. And I've been very fortunate because my deprogramming process hasn't taken me 20 years or 40 years.
Right, and you're doing it yourself, right? It's not like you have to. I mean, it's good to go to a therapist, that can help too, but there's ways where you can gradually maybe study like you did and just sort things out in process over time too, right?
Well, you can study and you can do research and you can learn facts, but that experience when I was waiting outside the Kingdom Hall, where I was afraid of the elders, that provided a lot of insight. That I was still in fear of this organization as an authority figure.
Yeah, and now we're talking
representing God.
And now we're only talking 1 year ago too, because it was only been like 13 or 14 months since I got DF'd at that night, and you were there to support me, and then all of a sudden these feelings are flooding back on you, and so tell me where you've come since then to now.
Well, you realize that in your deep heart, you still believe that you're unworthy and you're still in fear of this authority figure. So in your head, you know they're not God's organization. They claim to be, you know, the visible organization that God has. But in your heart, you kind of believe it. So I'm very thankful that you have your website, you know, JWStruggle, that you can help people, and I can tell my story, and I can add that the process of getting out can take years and decades, and hopefully we can help people shorten that process so that they can enjoy the remainder of their life.
Yeah, wow, that's a good point. That's really good, and it's helpful. It's helpful for us to just talk with one another. It's therapeutic for people to watch videos like this. Hopefully it's therapeutic as opposed to dwelling on the negative. You know, sometimes I know even myself, I'm guilty of that. I will dwell on all the negatives and, you know, the pedophilia, and then we start wanting to just call the witnesses names and the elders names, and they're all bad. And I know for myself, I want to work. That's something that I want to work on too. Is cleaning out some of that anger. You know, because the more angry you are and the more hateful you are, even though maybe you have a right to be, but it does something to you too if you hold on to it, you know.
Yeah, it doesn't benefit you or your family in the end if you hold on to a lot of negative feelings. Of course, if I've been to part of an organization that's not loyal to me for 40 years, you have a right to be angry, but it doesn't serve you well to live your life angry. So it's a process to not only get undoctrinated, but to live the remainder of your life and enjoy what you have.
Yeah, and not define yourself as an ex this or that. You know, you're just a human being. You want to participate in society, because as witnesses, we were always taught that we're above society, we're disconnected from worldlings and worldly people. So I know for me, that's helped me too, is to get involved in, you know, hey, I registered to vote, you know, and I'm more involved in helping people or doing charitable things or whatever it is. That too, I think, can help a person connect with society, with what's really going on in this earth, because this is the only earth we got. We need to help take care of it. And if you do believe in God, I think, you know, God probably wants us to help take care of people and one another and society and all those things.
Well, that's the other thing. You know, with the belief system of Jehovah's Witness that we had, you did the right thing because you're supposed to. But I've actually learned from atheists that you do the right thing because that's what you want to do, and it makes you happy.
Good for them.
And it's not a sacrifice to do the right thing. You know, you're not being the martyr. You just enjoy helping.
Yeah.
Being part of the community.
You're getting satisfaction in that.
Yeah, very rewarding.
Now, there was one pivotal story or situation that happened in your life having to do with your daughter that I know affected you a lot. How could it not? It's your child. Could you share that with us?
Well, I did have my daughter kind of late in life, and again, that's because of the Watchtower teachings. You know, don't bring children to a wicked world. Rebecca wasn't planned, but when she was born, she had a hole in her heart, and it never closed. So when she was 2 years old, she had surgery, and that was about, I have been disfellowship for probably less than a year at that point. But we had to go to Julian Packard Children's Hospital. In, what town is that? In Stanford, that's right, it's in Stanford.
Yeah, and I would like to just interject that that is a very, it must have been an extremely terrifying situation, even if you had, you know, family members and all this big group around you to give you support. It would still, you know, regardless, it's going to be traumatic. And here you are basically doing it on your own, it sounds like.
Yeah, I was there, and I was the only person from her father's side of her family. But on her mom's side, they're all witnesses, so they had a large group.
Okay.
So I definitely felt alone, I felt outnumbered. And of course, during the whole time at the hospital, they're ignoring you, or they're giving you dirty looks. In fact, I was even hushed, I was even told to be quiet by my ex-stepdaughter. And that was a big humiliation, because I'm asking the doctor questions about my daughter, her heart surgery, and this 9-year-old girl tells me to be quiet, you're bothering the doctor. But it was really, it really hurt that my family was not there. And she had to be put on a heart-lung machine, because while they're operating on her heart, the machine has to do the breathing and the pumping of the blood for her. So that happened for her at a very tender age. She was 2. And it was tough. It was very anxiety ridden. And I can't tell you how alone I felt. It was a very difficult time. And that's what kind of opened my eyes, like, I need to stop being loyal to this organization.
So your parents, your siblings, they were all active witnesses, and so just based on that, they just said, well, we're not going to go to this. I mean,
well, I do have parents and a brother, and my brother has his family, and they weren't there. I asked them about it later, and they said, well, we didn't know the dates, but for me it didn't matter what the reason or the excuse was. They weren't there, and it did put me in a position where there wasn't a lot of support.
Yeah, that's tough. Well, I tell you what, the good news is that you have a beautiful, healthy daughter.
Yeah, she's healthy,
and your life today is radically better than maybe you thought it was going to end up being. You're happy, you're healthy, you have an excellent job. You know, you've got people that love you. You've got a beautiful woman that loves you, and a family unit. And that's the silver lining. That's that rainbow that we can't maybe see when we're leaving the witnesses, or when we're reading about the UN, or we're reading Crisis of Conscience, and we're waking up. I mean, it feels like you're getting kicked in the stomach when you first learn that stuff.
Yes, there is life after Watchtower. I learned more about the witnesses being out than being in.
Oh yeah.
And just to put a positive on this, Teresa, would you like to come into the frame? This is my beautiful mate.
Hi, Eric.
Hello.
So yes, there is life after Watchtower, and we want to help those people to move on emotionally and stop condemning themselves in their heart, because it's a beautiful life and it's a short life, and we got to help people get through this process of being deprogrammed.
Yeah, while we're here, we gotta get busy living.
That's right.
It's true. Well, hey, thank you so much, Ramos family, and all of you, and you know, for your friendship, Eric, and you know, helping me when I needed it. And you know, this is going to help other people, and that's one of the beauties of it, is being able to do that and to move on. And that's what we're doing, all of us, as we.
For those struggling, who they got kicked out or those struggling because they want to leave, there's a wonderful life waiting for you. And Eric has been instrumental in helping a lot of people with his JWStruggle. And I wanted to tell my story. That way I could help him help other people.
That's good. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
The order is rapidly fading, for the times they are a-changing.